So I'm really excited that we're getting a chance to have this conversation. We went to Midwest eCom this year, and as well as CES, which we just got back from. We had a great time at CES 6 in Indianapolis. And at both, I ended up getting a chance to present on self-care and burnout, and as it applies to e-commerce entrepreneurs. We got a lot of really great feedback about it. We're still getting really good feedback about it. And you and I were kind of talking and thought, let's turn this into more of a online training that we can post on the YouTube channel, and people can kind of get a hold of that. So that's what we're going to do today. I'm really excited that we're doing this together also.
Yes, same here.
But, so the topic came up. I kind of started looking at it back earlier this year. It just kind of seemed like I was starting to hear more and more from people. They were kind of describing, really, honestly, symptoms of burnout. And I kind of started thinking, well, that's interesting. And I think I'm not alone in that, because around the same time, I started seeing other folks also having webinars on the same topic. Robin Johnson at Best from the Nest, she speaks to that pretty often, and self-care, she really prioritizes very well. Stephen Smotherman also back in May, he had a really great webinar where he looked at burnout and how it will affect your business. In fact, I think he even said something along the lines of, come find out why your business is failing, and the purpose behind that was really burnout. So it's really a significant issue. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we've all come to this InventoryLab team from different viewpoints and careers and things, and we're all molded together now. But you've always kind of prioritized, the self-care, preventing burnout, making sure that, we're all, taking the time for ourselves so that it doesn't affect us or families or work or that sort of thing. Is that something that comes from your professional background or your, work history, that sort of thing? Or how did you come about that?
It does. And it probably played a big role in your previous career also. So before InventoryLab, I worked in the nonprofit sector. And that particular sector is really, folks working in that line of work are really at high risk for burnout. A lot of victim advocacy work, violence prevention work. I did a lot of public speaking, but also a lot of one-on-one victim advocacy work. And in that kind of work, it's called vicarious trauma. So it's always, being just very vigilant about avoiding vicarious trauma and having pieces in place so that you're able to kind of navigate through that, because burnout, and really in any occupation, it can be, can bring things to a screeching halt. The same was true for you, I assume, in your previous background in 911.
Yeah, definitely.
So did you guys have were you given tools and education around avoiding burnout and just an ongoing discussion around it?
To be honest, early in my career, it was not anything that anybody ever really talked about. You just kind of, in ours, it was call to call to call. You get off one call that would be maybe a baby not breathing, and you're going right into a call of a horrific accident. You barely have time to breathe before you're picking up the next one, because the 911 industry, it's notoriously understaffed. So we don't have the luxury of, I'm going to get off the floor for a half hour and take a breath. It just doesn't happen. So it's you're on going, and it's the mindset that then was, buckle up, you can do this. You don't need to take a break, And then eventually, in the last few years of my career, they started to emphasize that more, and still have the issue about understaffing, but they're trying to do more stress management and that sort of thing. So it's getting better, but there's still a lot of that attitude of you can push through it.
Yeah. There really is a lack of conversations around self-care. Really, even in fields that you would think would be, that would really prioritize it. My son is a first responder. He's a firefighter in the city of Philadelphia. And they do have conversations around self-care, but, not to the extent that I think that they should. 911 definitely would be one that I would say are folks that need to have ongoing self-care education. And that should be not just encouraged, but almost required, I would think. But in social work types of fields, nonprofit, self-care is really a conversation, but I kind of developed a reputation as somebody that prioritized that. So I would be called in to kind of offer education and trainings to other professionals, other agencies around self-care. So, hoping to perpetuate that. But I did not anticipate seeing the kinds of signs of burnout that I'm seeing amongst entrepreneurs. And when I really started to look at the topic, found a lot of things that really surprised me. For example, entrepreneurs are really at one of the highest risks of burnout. And so as I dove into that, I found out a lot of really interesting things.
So when you're talking about burnout, you just said, is that something different than depression, or how would you define the two, or the differences between the two?
That's actually a really great question and a really important question. So they do kind of manifest the same, but it is so critical to really differentiate the two. So when we're talking about depression, we're going to see things like ongoing fatigue, isolation from a routine that was, that they enjoyed, whatever the case may be. And anxiety can also manifest the same way. What they do have in common is that they both take place over time. And that's really important to remember when we're talking about treatment and what treatment is going to look like, or, how you kind of navigate through that. But the big difference is that burnout is occupational. It's always going to be occupational. So when we're talking about e-commerce entrepreneurs, people selling on Amazon, eBay, whatever, a change in the bottom line, a nice uptick in the net profit can alleviate symptoms of burnout, and or the opposite direction in the net profit can exasperate symptoms of burnout. But when we're talking about depression, what doesn't matter what the net profit or what the bottom line is doing. Depression is going to be consistent, and the treatment is going to be, sometimes there's medical intervention, talk therapy, those sorts of things. But self-care is going to be entirely different.
Gotcha. Are there any risk factors, that you've found or that you've seen that are maybe unique to some of the e-commerce or online retailers that maybe differentiate that from, say, a different type of business? Or?
Yes, absolutely. So, teachers, they experience burnout. They're at high risk. Physicians are at high risk. There's all sorts of ones that we would think of, but entrepreneurs, again, they're right high up, and they do have unique risk factors. So number one, so especially working with InventoryLab, we have a lot of new entrepreneurs, people that don't have that background in business. So they may have left traditional careers, and they have now they own their own business. They are responsible for the well-being and this, whether or not this thing floats or sinks. And that's a very uneasy feeling for a lot of people, and kind of navigating through that. So that really puts them at high risk. They are going to have kind of more skin in the game as well. So financially, maybe they've got their own finances funding that, which is usually the case. Thankfully with Amazon and, e-commerce, that doesn't have to be a financial risk that, if you were to lose it, would be devastating to your family or to your well-being. But they usually have their personal finances in the game. A lot of folks are brand new entrepreneurs. So they're not, they didn't start businesses right out of high school or right out of college. Maybe they're starting businesses post-retirement, or, just at a different phase in life. It's new to them, and it's very, very exciting. It feels like that's their baby. So they have a lot of emotional investment in that as well. So that's going to be a factor. If they have employees, that's usually a very uneasy feeling for people at first, that they feel it's not only is my well-being on the line, theirs is too. Things like a lot of folks are going into partnership with a spouse or a partner, a family member, a really, really good friend. And, and that is a really great thing. If people can kind of maintain healthy boundaries, that really works out. But it can also, does, even if it's going perfectly, it does add a different layer of stress, a different kind of stress almost on top of it. And then especially for the e-commerce crowd, location or geography puts them at risk. So, if their inventory is stored in their home, if they're listing and they're packing and they're shipping in their home, if they have easy access, to get into their workspace, it is extremely difficult to separate themselves from that, which is going to be necessary at some point in time. You have got to unplug at some point in time, and it's very, very difficult, especially our crowd, or, they're known for multitasking. Like I know, when I used e-commerce for forever. I relied on eBay and Amazon to kind of keep the lights on when before joining InventoryLab and working in the nonprofit sector. And it just felt like I can't sit here and watch this movie. I could also be listing on eBay while this movie is on, or, I could be multitasking. I can't just duck into, TJ Maxx and just get what I need to get and get out, because it would go against everything in, every part of my being to not take a swing by like those go-to areas of TJ Maxx or something, to source or to scan. So it weaves itself within, your daily life, especially retail arbitrage. You're not home with your family. You're getting out early for Black Friday. You're the one that's out there at like 2 a.m. To get those sales. And, so it is difficult. It's not 9 to 5. It really can be 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. So you kind of have all of these things all kind of intertwined with each other. And together can really put somebody, just really back them into a corner when they're just all of a sudden, facing burnout and they're not really sure what to do.
Yeah. No, when you mention that, I'll just duck into this store, I'll duck into that store. It's like, you never know what you're missing if you don't. So there's always that kind of pull. So it's like, it's constantly on your mind. So it sounds like there are like unique, risk factors for the online retailers. But as far as the signs of burnout, is that also unique? Are they similar, or how does that all manifest itself?
Yeah, a lot of it's, again, still going to look like those traditional signs of depression that we've all heard of from the many commercials that we see. So ongoing fatigue, exhaustion that is ongoing. So that we're not talking about, exhaustion because you stayed up late the night before, but this ongoing, almost like unexplained sort of fatigue, that feeling of like being run down, the short-temperedness, kind of sudden cynicism. So this is going to be anything that's really different than who you were before. So if you were short-tempered before and you're short-tempered now, we're not going to look at that as a red flag, but something that's very different, from how you kind of were before. But outside of that, you want to keep yourself in check if you're saying things like, what's the point? What's the point of doing that? Everybody else has this thing figured out. I don't. Everybody else is gaining traction. I'm not. I go online. I'm looking at all these videos. I'm seeing everybody's screenshots of their, from the seller app. It's not working for me. What's the point? I can't make a difference. So that would be like and it always kind of makes me cringe when I see people post those screenshots, like, look at all the sales I had today. And it's like, yeah, but bruh, seriously, if we knew, like, get all of your expenses out of there, get your cost of goods sold out of there, and then tell us what it is. And we'll celebrate that with you. And we'll pat you on the back and tell you what a great woman you are, awesome entrepreneur, great dude. But posting that kind of stuff without the explanation, it really is very harmful to others, because they don't understand that, they don't have that true perspective. But that sense of like that loss of, that sense of self-efficacy, that what you do matters and that your voice matters. So if you're feeling or even articulating, what's the point? What's the point? You want to kind of start to see that as a red flag. Feelings of isolation, definitely. Like, who am I going to talk to? Who am I going to talk to? I can't, especially if you're doing it on your own, if you don't have a partner, a business partner, it's difficult to talk to like a spouse or a partner. There was a guy named Brett was just speaking at CES, and he said that his mother has no clue what he does. And she said something like, what do you do for Amazon again? I said, oh my gosh, that's my mother. She still tells people I work for Amazon, So I can't call my mom on the phone and talk with her about that because she doesn't understand even what I'm doing. If I don't have that network, who am I going to talk to? Who can I say? Everybody else is having this figured out. I'm really hitting a wall here. So, kind of just feeling just that isolated really from everybody. Lack of desire to engage in whether it's business or personal. But again, this is going to be something very different than who you were before. If you weren't very engaged with your family before, you need to get engaged with your family. Just saying, just going to put that out there. But, but if you weren't before and you aren't now, we're not going to look at that as a sign of burnout. But you were very excited to get up in the morning and work on your business. You didn't mind the clutter of your eBay inventory. You just like to go down there and kind of mess around with it because it made you feel good. And now all of a sudden you're like, I don't even want to look at it. I just want to forget it's even there. That very big difference in behavior.
So those negative effects that people experience in burnout, it sounds like those are unique as well to the e-commerce seller, the online retailer. Is that correct?
Yeah, a lot of them really can be. Because again, a lot of times these people are going to be in business with their spouse, and that location factor. So really, entrepreneurs in general can be at risk for this. But when we're talking about 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, it is unique to somebody that starts is an electrician and starts her own business or his own business. They can walk into TJ Maxx and it's not going to be an issue. They don't feel like that. Like, if I don't look, this is going to be the one time I find that was going to be my breakthrough and I missed it, and I just walked through, past an entire shelf of those things and I could have done something awesome. So they are at risk in very, very different ways. But when we talk about those things like the effects and how am I going to know if I'm experiencing burnout? If you're already experiencing burnout, it's important to kind of say that you have a tendency to lack self-awareness to recognize those signs. So it's almost like that's why I would want to say, if you're hearing in your head, what's the point? What's the point? What's the point? And that wasn't there before. Know that even though you might not be able to pinpoint that as burnout, so that should start to kind of draw your attention to that. So even if you're not self-aware of it, trust yourself and know that that's something that you need to evaluate.
So those are kind of the broad signs, I guess, that people might kind of get an inkling that there's something wrong. What should they specifically be looking for, though, for those negative effects of burnout?
Yeah, so if they're experiencing burnout, first, it's going to have kind of a ripple effect. So, being a leader of a business, especially if you're the head of your household as well, or if both heads of household are running this business, somebody that's experiencing burnout might start to see their family kind of stepping back a little bit and isolating themselves because they don't know what to do. They don't understand what's happening. They're seeing that cynicism. They're kind of seeing that short-temperedness. And, they kind of have their wagon hitched to you in this business. So that causes like a sense of insecurity. Like, is everything going to be okay? Is it going to be okay? So you might see them kind of pull back. Same thing with employees. They're really taking their cues from the leader of that business. They start to see burnout. They don't know what it is. All they see is maybe we're not okay. Maybe this business isn't as healthy as we would like it to be. And that's when you have a team of people that are kind of, taking a lunch break and saying like, hey, I don't know what's going on with Angie over there, but maybe we need to start looking for some other work. So they're kind of not, so now they're not invested really in the success of the business either. So performance is going to change, as it should, because they're uneasy, they're feeling insecure. So that's going to take a dip as well. You're going to feel increased anxiety. You're going to feel this increased frustration, maybe where you really hadn't before, like that anxiety that kind of starts working its way up, you're like, why can't I feel like I have a handle on things? I can't get in front of things. So that ongoing anxiety. And then that willingness to take those calculated risks, and the inability really to make informed decisions. This is where we start to really see the impact on the business. You cannot have burnout and scale your business at the same time. These two things really cannot coexist because your family is withdrawing. So now you don't have their support. You don't have that support network. Your employees aren't performing as well. You're not able to take calculated risks. You're not making informed decisions. This directly and very quickly will impact your bottom line. Burnout takes down businesses all the time. All the time. When we were just at CES and I was kind of looking, getting ready to present, really thinking, how many of these people aren't going to be here for CES in 2019 because they hit this wall and they weren't able to navigate through it. It can just really, profitability and growth that's going to come to a screeching halt. And we all know if you're not growing, if you're not scaling, if you're just kind of staying still, there is no staying still. The moment you stop moving, it's like a shark, you're toast. If you stop moving forward.
Yeah. So so we have the risk factors and the effects, but so say you notice that you might have those risk factors and you see maybe a couple of those effects happening. What do you do as far as self-care when you the light bulb comes on and you're like, man, I'm going down that path I shouldn't go down. Kim warned me about this. Now, what do I do as far as taking care of it? Self-care, I think, is what you call it.
Yeah. So I would break it up into two different scenarios. One is exactly what you just said. So what do I do if I'm already experiencing self-care? What steps should I be taking in this moment? At first it's important to identify what self-care is and what it isn't. So a lot of people hear self-care, especially in like the nonprofit sector, if you're talking to social workers and teachers, self-care might be, well, I took a bubble bath last night, or I took the whole weekend and I binge watched, Netflix and things like that. And those things are great. Those small incremental things can really help you refocus. For me, that's Candy Crush. A woman was talking to me at CES and she said, I use Candy Crush too. And I said, oh, well, let's compare. She's like, let's see who's got more of the levels. And so she was all excited and she's like, I don't know, I think I'm going to beat you. And then I was almost like really embarrassed, like, oh my gosh, because she was like, she was like at 500 and something. And then so we were comparing phones. I'm seeing if I can't pull it up right here to tell you what I'm on, but I'm on level 2000 and something in Candy Crush. So I was like, yeah, I needed a lot of self-care there for a while. 2,693 for the record. There I am. I don't know if you can see that. 2693. So she was like, oh. I'm like, no. So I was embarrassed and she was embarrassed. But those small incremental things are really can be good. But self-care is it's part of your life. It's woven into who you are. It's not a thing. It's a declaration. It is an outward manifestation. It's a communication to people around you that you prioritize your well-being. So it can happen in all sorts of things. But it shows up in your words, your actions, your behaviors. People just, equate self-care with you. Like what I said, that Robin Johnson is always really good at communicating the importance of self-care. She has established healthy boundaries. We've only worked together a handful of times. I've seen her speak, but I can tell you that that's just something that I picked up on very early, that she prioritizes her time. She has healthy boundaries. So it's kind of like these things that you weave in throughout your entire life. But that would be before self-care is an issue. So if you haven't been practicing self-care, if you haven't been aware of burnout and all of a sudden, you're experiencing symptoms, number one is you need to get some perspective. So especially with business, when you're like eyeball deep in the minutia of running that business and you're experiencing burnout, you cannot have perspective. You're kind of just immersed in it, and it's really, really difficult. So one of the things that I kind of tell people to do is to offer to somebody exactly the thing that you lack. So by that, I mean, if you're feeling like, I can't figure this out, I can't get traction, everybody else has it figured out, and I can't, if you feel like it's shifting sand, you and I talk about that a lot in the webinars with InventoryLab, and we talk with new users. We talk about that people come to InventoryLab for the bells and the whistles of, listing and labels, and those are all great time savers. That's what, the labels, that got me right out of the gate. Was like, oh yeah, this is luxurious. This is awesome. But the power of InventoryLab comes in after the sale, being able to see exactly where you stand as a business. Not this like, I don't know, money's going out, money's coming in, but I don't know, and how discouraging that was for me personally. If you're one of those people, it's, instead of working harder and harder and harder and harder, which is going to exacerbate the burnout, I want you to stop what you're doing, and I want you to offer what you lack to somebody else. So that doesn't mean go figure out somebody else's numbers for them, but it does mean something like go find somebody like a recent college grad, or somebody that's has recently found themselves unexpectedly alone. Maybe they lost a partner. Maybe somebody just entering, retirement, but has maybe kind of expressed that they need to get a handle on their money. Sit down with them and help them make a simple budget. not redoing their portfolio, nothing like, we're not moving things around in their investments, but like that 90-minute, what's your income? What are your fixed expenses? What are your variable expenses? What's left? Let's tell that where to go. And that's it. Just kind of giving that time to somebody else. The other one would be a mentor. If you feel like I just need somebody to walk through this with me, everybody says something different. I've got all these tabs. I can't figure this thing out. I'm scared to death that I'm doing it wrong, but everything contradicts. I don't know who to trust. Then mentor somebody else. So that doesn't mean, start your own course or something like that, unless that's what you want to do. But that means, that somebody in your circle is really, really needs something that you're an expert at doing. They need a mentor. So that might be somebody in your family has mentioned or said in passing, they kind of asked a probing question about Amazon. Like, well, what is this Amazon thing that you do? What is it, like drop shipping or something? And, they kind of asked like that, almost like side-eyed kind of question. But maybe it was because they want to be able to chart their own course. They're interested. And you can give them information that took you months to learn. You can just kind of help them understand that better, or send them links of to content that to be reputable. When we would go to when I presented at CES and at Midwest Ecom, I said, somebody in this room is lacking exactly what you're an expert at. That's all. Just like a 10-minute conversation where you can give information that's invaluable. And I used the example, I think I asked the question, like, where were you in, I think I said like March 2015. So for me, I had done the work. I had done eBay for many, many years before that. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to do this FBA thing. It was very complicated. And I did have all those tabs up at the top of my screen. And, I had sourced probably what may have been the worst possible products I could have chosen for the first time I was sending in stuff. But I had my impulse sealer when I didn't even know what an impulse sealer was before. I had this inventory. I had listed it in Seller Central. I am ready and raring to go. Seller Central said they wanted thermal labels on their products. I had bought my Dymo printer. So I had created shipments. I'm ready to go. It took me 16 hours to get to that point. Literally 16 hours from start to finish. I was exhausted. I had worked, if I wasn't working my job, I was researching this constantly, webinars and articles and everything you could possibly think of. And I got to that point where I had created the shipments and I couldn't figure out how to print the labels on my Dymo. I couldn't figure it out. I'm like, I don't understand. It keeps wanting to print off these 30-up labels. They said that I had to have a Dymo or a Brother or a Zebra printer, and I got my Dymo. I got it on eBay, but I got my Dymo. I've got my correct size labels. I've got my stuff. It's impulse sealed, and why can't I print this? And I was exhausted, and I hit a wall. I cracked, and I cried, and I cried. I mean, I sobbed. I am not ashamed to say that it wasn't just tears. I sobbed. I felt like a failure. If I can't figure out how to print barcode labels, who in the heck do I think I am thinking I'm going to run a business? After all of that, after all those months, and I can't even print a label, what's the point? And I don't even know what made me do it, but like on a whim, I posted in a Facebook group, one of the many Facebook groups that are out there, that I can't figure this out. Literally within a minute or two, there was a response. And it was this guy, and he said, "What's your phone number?" I was like, oh, gosh.
Yeah, here we go.
Like, clearly, I'm a little vulnerable right now. Can we not make this gross? But I had seen his name.
Did you double check to make sure you were in the right group?
I would like to think I'd like to say that I did. I can't say for sure that I did, honestly. I mean, I was like, there was snot going everywhere. There were tears going everywhere. But
you had labels on your mind.
Yeah. I'm telling you, I was so tired. It was awful. But so he said, "What's your number?" And I gave it to him. And I might have even posted it in the group. I hate to say that. I can't say that for sure, but it's possible that I did that. So here I am, like, "Yes, sir, please, here's my personal telephone number." And then my phone rang. And on the other line was this great guy. His name is Jared. I still see him around all the time, and I think he's still helping people the same way. But Jared was working. I think he's got a whole gaggle of kids because I heard them all playing in the background and, and having fun. And he's pushing this cart around that he had just got from Costco. And so he's working. But while he's doing all that, he talked me through step by step by step by step how to print the labels on this thing. And I would have not figured that out in a million years. And him doing that, it was a very short telephone call. The difference between him doing that and not doing that is the difference between me being here, not just an Amazon seller, but even me being here. And, it made such a huge difference because I didn't know, because he said, yeah, Amazon tells you to do that, but they don't they don't have the tools in place for you to print your labels like that. Well, that doesn't make any sense. But I didn't know that at the time. I just thought I was a failure. And, so he gave to me this, what was simple for him was something that I lacked, and was the difference between me starting that business and me ending it right there. It never even would have gotten off the ground. So neither of those things, whether you're helping somebody do like a budget or you're helping somebody, figure out these simple tasks, these are not things that are going to cure, burnout. Like I said at the very, very beginning, important to remember these things take place over time. You need to allow yourself the opportunity to get reacquainted with not being burned out. But what these exercises kind of do is it allows you to kind of pan out just a little bit enough to get that perspective. You cannot work through it unless you're able to really kind of evaluate where you are in the spectrum of burnout and to figure out how to kind of make your way back out of it. That would be the first thing. Before burnout, you always want to have folks knowing who their support network is. Like, I should be able to ask anybody, tell me 4 people in your support network. And you should be able to just rattle those 4 off. And somebody experiencing burnout, I would tell them, I want you to go to 2 people in your support network, and I want you to tell them that you think you're experiencing burnout. I would encourage folks to not have 2 of those people be somebody that has their lives in any way, shape, or form hitched to your business. So you go outside of your company, go outside of your family, somebody that's in a support network, and just tell them, I think I'm dealing with some burnout, but nothing beyond that. They might say something like, I'm here for you. If you want to talk, what's going on? Let me know. And if you're feeling up to it, by all means. But just the act of articulating it, that's enough for that day. You've done well at that point. Just articulating that I'm experiencing burnout to 2 people would be something that I would really, really suggest. And then the other thing I would say would be to identify what I like to call the movable pieces. So a lot of times we feel like there is no wiggle room, there is no flexibility. If you feel like that, you're looking like too broad, simplify. The movable pieces might be, really getting down to the fine print of things that are movable, because sometimes the bigger pieces aren't movable. So it might be, I can commit to not being on my mobile device during a movie, or I can commit to being on a mobile device, not being on a mobile device just during the trailer of a movie. So get smaller until you can find, okay, well, what is the movable piece? Maybe it's, I won't get on a mobile device 15 minutes before the movie starts, whatever, until you get control over something so that you almost feel like you have a sense of control over your own environment and you kind of can get a handle on things. Just get down to like the nice small pieces. What are the movable pieces on that chessboard? And kind of start, that will kind of help you. Again, this is about getting perspective, panning out a little bit, being able to kind of get that overarching view. Another suggestion would be things like reducing business-related conversations. So we all love to talk about it all the time. Like we're always bouncing each other. This community particularly is good at just this rapid exchange of information, and that's awesome. But that constant exposure it keeps you engaged, even if you're not touching, your business, or you're not working. Mentally, you're still engaged with the business and not in the present, maybe where you need to be. So you can kind of get that distance. So maybe that movable piece is reducing how often you're talking about any business related type topics. I would never try to even tell somebody like 9 to 5. And after that, you can't talk about it anymore. So I really encourage folks to kind of like pick a 10-hour block of time for each day, because we all, 7 days a week, folks are usually doing one thing or another. But outside of that 10-hour block of time, try to cut down business-related conversations by 50%. Just start there.
Oh, that's a good point.
You don't got cold turkey. That doesn't really work for anything. So just 50%. So if it's 9 a.m. to 7 p.m., you can still talk about it, but just cut it down by 50%. Monitor that conversation. It brings really attention. It draws your focus into how often you're wanting to talk about it, which again gives you that perspective. Like, that's all I'm talking about.
Right.
It really, and that's again, getting that perspective. So these are all things that take these tiny steps towards being aware that burnout is occurring, but then you have got to allow the time to go by to recover from that. And so it's kind of one of those things like when you get an antibiotic, do not stop taking this medication until it's gone. Gaining that perspective is great, but you really have to continue that work. So that's, once you kind of get a handle, you get that perspective, you really want to have an opportunity to then bring in the things that would help you avoid it, to begin with.
Yeah, so you mentioned avoiding it. I mean, those are all great tips on how to kind of deal with it after it's happening or when you recognize it. But what do you do? What would you tell somebody on how to avoid getting to that point of the burnout in the first place? There must be some kind of prevention tips that people can take from this.
Yeah, that's actually my favorite topic, primary prevention. That kind of came out of the federal health initiatives from way back when they were looking at the primary prevention as opposed to tertiary and secondary prevention. So it is prevention, meaning at the root, uprooting it, so the problem never occurs to begin with. So number one, embrace the fact that you're at high risk for burnout. And, if you can accept that fact and really kind of internalize that you are at risk and put some things in place, first of all, that's going to play a really, really big part in avoiding it altogether. And when you know that that's going to be a risk, you're going to want to put a plan in place. So just acknowledging that you're going to hit that at some point in time or be confronted with that, you kind of start to put those pieces in place. So number one is prioritizing your well-being, kind of what I was talking about earlier. And that really means bringing all of those pieces into your life so that the people around you also know that you prioritize it. And that can start off in really simple ways. Things like, having, like on my desktop, on my computer, I have just like memes and graphics and stuff. Some things are funny just to make me laugh. Some things are, when I'm feeling frustrated, something that maybe validates my frustration that says, yeah, you should totally be frustrated over that. Or, just something that's encouraging even. Or some of them are all of the above, things like that. But I also share those with other people. I'm constantly sharing, one thing or another with the folks on our team and, posting things like that. Making yourself vulnerable, which I do pretty often with our team. And I'll probably show this during the webinar, so I'll probably cut over to it at this point in time. But the video that I did right when we were about to roll out Scoutify 2, like tensions were really high. We put a lot, we put a lot of work into that, and we were nervous. Like, what if something breaks? What if, anything could really happen? And we're pretty, we're on point. It's all hands on deck with any release, but Scoutify 2 is really big for us. And I was about to go live with Steven Smotherman. He was going to be introducing Scoutify 2 live to his membership. And, I was nervous also. So I made that video of me dancing in my chair and singing to George Michael's Freedom 90 and dancing with my phone. But making myself vulnerable really, I don't know what kind of an impact it had because we're a 100% remote team, so I wasn't there to see anybody's faces, but really can break the tension and really kind of, again, gives that perspective, brings it back to like, look, we worked really, really hard to make this app that, we want it to be awesome. If we were putting out an app with the intention of it being mediocre, then like, yeah, you should be nervous, you know. But when we look at our intentions and we put our heart and soul into it, we left no stone unturned. And, you know, with any software, there's going to be glitches. We're going to find bugs. And, but I made myself vulnerable and
the game software. That's what I love about the team too. Everybody cares so much about the product and the end product and making sure that the business owners have what they need and it works right. You know, we do take that to heart. Really invest ourselves in it.
Yeah, Ryan and Elizabeth especially, they're very. It's all very personal for them. And it's personal to all of us, but I think even more so that I think, you know, this is their baby. Just like, you know, we're talking about entrepreneurs and businesses that being their baby. You know, that this is theirs. So even more so for them. So making a video like that, it's almost, it's a love letter to myself as much as it is like to the rest of the team. But like, even though being a remote team, still have developed that reputation of prioritizing self-care because it's like speaking fluent self-care. It's in a lot of what I do. And, you know, and having those healthy boundaries, establishing those healthy boundaries. Again, my words, my actions, my behaviors, you know, reinforcing that I prioritize that and knowing the true value of my time. So for entrepreneurs, especially, that we actually get to see a lot because we see a lot of people that are always like right at that tipping point, where, you know, am I going to delegate tasks? Am I going to, you know, subscribe to a software tool? That first investment, especially if it's a monetary investment, that's a really big tipping point for people. And it's kind of, I know they'll come to it eventually, but it's always hard to see that they do not have a true value or perspective of the value of their time. They don't understand the value of their time. That's the webinar that Stephen Smotherman had done. He made this really great point. He was talking about just as the tasks that we all spend our time on, you know, in e-commerce. And he said, if you're doing a task that could be accomplished by a minimum wage team worker, you're working a minimum wage job. Therefore, you know, really, what a great point. So you're going to be running a minimum wage business. Was that the goal that you set out to accomplish when you launched your business? Probably not. You know, but when we look at it like that, we're like, oh, that's a really good point. Steven Peterson, though, he said something the other day. He posted about everything he had done in his day, and a lot of it was things like he put together a rack, and he did. And I said, Stephen Smotherman said, you know, if you're working minimum wage. But he actually made a really good point. He called me out on it, and I so appreciated it. He was talking about that there's really something to be said for getting your hands on something and building it. And I was like, yeah, that's a good point. So the following week, I actually pulled up my power washer, and I power washed my front steps, which like really, really needed it. And I took a picture of it, and I'm going to send it to him. I'm going to be like, thanks for the reminder, Stephen. He's got a great podcast too. I love listening to his podcast episodes.
Yeah, I like that perspective because it can kind of take your mind off of all the stressors that seem to be bearing down on you. I put together a rack. I didn't have to think about anything else other than, you know, screw A into this, you know, part and that sort of thing. Unless it's an IKEA furniture, I guess, then that can be frustrating.
But I had totally forgotten about what an experience that is. Like for me, power washing, like my husband, JP, it's mowing the lawn and yard work. And, you process things. Things are kind of getting filed away, you know, clearing out the clutter in your mind. And, then also being able to see the results of your work. So when I say working a minimum wage job or a business, there are going to be some of those things that you need to reserve for yourself. Those tasks that delight you, that you know, just kind of like, you know, whatever the case, whatever that might be, washing the car, whatever. Continue to do those things. Don't get rid of those entirely. And you can thank Stephen Peterson for reminding me of that. But you know, things like, again, this is all really going to come back to perspective. Things like understanding that today's outcomes are today's outcomes and are not a predictor of tomorrow's bottom line. You know, you've got to kind of keep these things today and not letting the outcome of today impact the decisions for tomorrow. Because again, remember, making, you know, those taking those calculated risks, making informed decisions. If you're still factoring in things from the past, that's going to hold you back. You are not going to make, the good decisions with any of that. And then not internalizing or personalizing your business. You are not your business. You are not your business. Your business is your business, and you are a human being, a living, breathing human being with intentions that were good, I hope, and you're doing the best you can. So you've got to detach the two, because again, that's really when we're talking about burnout, and when somebody starts to really internalize their business outcomes as their, as their personal outcomes, that is very difficult to undo. Very, very difficult. So really kind of making sure that we're separating those two, and, keeping that perspective. But things are going to happen. There's going to be, downturns and upturns and that sort of thing. So friction should be anticipated. It drives me nuts. It's almost like a pet peeve I've had for forever. When people say this too shall pass. First of all, they say it's biblical. It's not biblical. That is not biblical. It's a great cliche. It's a great saying, but it's not biblical. But nowhere did anybody ever say that only applies to the bad times. I don't like when people say it to people going through bad times, because I think it's very minimizing, but it applies to everything. If Q4 is if you're killing it in Q4, this too shall pass.
Yes.
If you're struggling, if you can't get that traction, this too shall pass. I
thought it was great at CES, the one presenter that talked about, when he was talking about, he's up there and you think of him as an expert when they're presenting, but he also mentioned that, I had a really rough day. I wasn't sure my business was going to keep going. It was to that point, and then it turned, and hills and valleys. You're going to have the hills, but prepare for the valleys.
And they are inevitable. It is going to happen. I had a really smart man once tell me, 1 minute you're going to be in the ceiling, and the next minute you're going to be on the floor. And he said it about something entirely different, but I've carried it with me my entire life. Because when you can anticipate, when your things are going great, and you anticipate that things aren't always going to be going great, it really just reduces the amount of time it takes to kind of feel like you got your feet back under you again, to accept that you're now on the floor, but you were on the ceiling before. You expected that to happen. There is no questioning like, oh, why did this happen to me? Or how did I get here? It's irrelevant. You expected that to come. So saying this too shall pass applies to all events in our lives, all seasons in our lives. Winter will turn to spring. And spring will turn to summer, and before you know it, you're going to be back. And if you live in my area outside of Philadelphia, it'll be February, and it's going to be, freezing cold and slushy and wet and muddy and that kind of thing. But and some people like that. I'm not one of them. But that will pass. So it's anticipating that. So you are at risk. Embrace the risk, and understand that there is going to be friction, and friction that applies to you on a Wednesday is not going to apply on a Thursday. Especially as an entrepreneur, you cannot let those things drive future outcomes, because they will. They very, very easily will if you let them, and nothing positive can come from that. And that, again, that also means the good stuff. If you see sales like you've never seen before for no reason whatsoever on one day, wake up ready to work just as hard the next day to do exactly what you did. And my hope is that every day will be like that for you. But we know that that's not the case. Having that support network, get that support network in place. So important. I will say, though, that if you are in partnership with somebody, a spouse, a partner, a best friend, whomever, to also have separate networks from each other. Because you're already up in each other's stuff all the time, especially if you're living in the same house together. But also, if your networks are the same, you're not gonna grow. You're in an echo chamber essentially, because you're both getting the same information, and bringing different perspectives and information together, challenging each other, asking those bigger questions. You're going to see some things grow, but it's also healthy. Again, getting those healthy boundaries. You've got to find a start and a stopping place for your work. And if you can't, those smaller things, what are those movable pieces?
So you'd mentioned delegating, and maybe, I believe you called it what Smotherman called the minimum wage job, if you can get that off onto somebody else. But it also applies, I think, like there's certain apps out there, certain other software tools that you can delegate some of that stuff, or maybe that'll take up a part of what you're doing now manually, maybe automate it a little bit. Can you tell us a little bit about that aspect of it?
Sure. It's not always about, hiring out work, but also upgrading your gear. So the hiring out stuff, obviously, in fact, there's third-party services, kind of like InventoryLab, that will connect you with really great VAs that are trained and really kind of take that off your plate. And if you're ready for that, great. But if not, again, remember getting like a little bit smaller, a little bit smaller, a little bit smaller. So I can't tell you how many people I've met that are getting a dymo is a tipping point.
Right. Yep.
It is. It's a really big deal. And it's not a huge investment, but we are all, especially my age, your age, and people older than us, we kind of have this really antiquated idea of what running a business is supposed to be. Like, it was just kind of ingrained in us that meant risking a lot financially, nose to the grindstone, sacrifice. And so people will think that they're paying for something with elbow grease, but what they're really doing is detrimental. So VAs are great, outsourcing things, but things like even in your house, if we're talking like lawn care or painting or whatever the case may be, start using the services where you can just go by and pick up your groceries or have them delivered to your house instead of going and walking up and down, the aisles, except that you'll be passing up opportunities to source from the clearance aisle. But, things like that. But then also your gear. So the dymo. People are not really, really aware of how much time they lose when they're special listing in Seller Central, where they list everything, they create shipments, they print these 30 up labels, and then they go back and they kind of link them all up. Yes, you will save a lot of time, but the value of your time, I typically find is much more than people think it actually is. So upgrading your gear, things like bubble wrap. And I use myself as an example again. I found a guy on bubble wrap or on Craigslist that offered bubble wrap for free. I was like, I'm all about that because, that would have been a big expense and I was getting ready to get started. So he said, yeah, we'll come up to this. So I had to drive about 20 minutes from here, this really big, plant, a manufacturing plant of some kind. And he said, drive around back of the plant, pull up right there by the bay doors, come up the steps and ring the buzzer, and we'll know you're out there. So I did, by myself, just go.
Sounds like the beginning of a horror movie.
Right? It's like, so I'm like, just giving out my number to random guys on Facebook and going to the back of manufacturing plants. You don't even want to know how I sourced that first batch that took me 16 hours. That was terrible. But that was very reckless on my part. But so I would, go there and now looking back on it probably was maybe not the best thing, but it worked out great. And I got a whole lot of, free bubble wrap and it was ongoing. In fact, he would give it to me. It was a huge bag and it would fill up the back of my minivan. Just one big bag, this huge bag is amazing. But when I really looked at it, the time it took me to reach out and say, hey, do you have any bubble wrap set aside? I'd love to run up and get it. And he says, yeah, sure. Like I got to wait for him to call me back or text me back. And then I get everything situated at home and I get in the van and I drive around back of the warehouse, walk up the steps and ring the doorbell. And we go in and we chit chat for a little while. Like, how's it going? And how's the family? Get the bag and put it in and drive out to the road again and drive home. When I look at the hours spent doing that, yes, the bubble wrap was free. What would be the monetary value of that versus the time that it took me to go get that versus the time it would have taken me? I would have just ordered it and had it delivered to my door. Mm-hmm. Same thing with craft paper. If people are going to newspaper companies and trying to talk them into like, hey, can I get your end rolls for craft paper? That's great. But when we're talking entrepreneur, you need to look at your time very different. If you're self-identifying as an entrepreneur, those are the things that people with hobbies selling online do. And if that describes you, then by all means, continue to connect to your community and use those resources wherever you can. But when you're looking to grow a business, you got to let go of the free bubble wrap. Unless it's your neighbor and they're bringing it to your door, then it's time to start ordering that. It's time to really start, investing in those tools. What do you need in your business? What are the tasks that you dread? What's not working? Maybe that's InventoryLab. Maybe that's something else. But you have got to utilize those tools. And they all have, free trials. Use them. You can, if you're using spreadsheets, the time that you're losing, the money that you're losing, is really, it would really be shocking if you were able to kind of get a handle on it. It would be shocking. So not just delegating, not just VAs and employees or having somebody come in to organize your eBay stuff. I mean, that'd be great. But look at all of those other things as well. You've got to upgrade your gear.
It's as simple as, like with InventoryLab, finding out, what did I pay for this last year? I know that there was and where did I get it from? You can look it up very quickly instead of which spreadsheet is that on, that sort of thing. It's all condensed into one, and there's other software too that do other things, similarly. But yeah, simplifying the process, you can find that stuff quickly.
Yeah. And a lot of people will say, well, I'm going to sit down one day and I'm going to create a system for myself. And I'm going to create those spreadsheets and I'm going to put them in a folder so that it all makes sense to me. If you have been saying that for greater than 90 days, for more than 90 days, you have already exceeded the value that you would get from that system. Let it go and move on. Get those automated systems where you don't have to create those folders. Let somebody else do that for you. That's not good use of your time. Let folks like us take care of that, or whatever program that is. But that, again, you're not a hobby seller. You're not just somebody with a hobby selling stuff online. An entrepreneur. You've got to take those steps. You have to. Well, I think that's about all we have to cover. Jeff, do you have anything left that you want to add to that at all?
No, I just think it was really informative, especially recognizing the signs, because when you get into that mindset of, going, and you don't feel like you can take that time to take a break and kind of get, like you said, the bigger picture, it's really good to have those signs out there and you have a team, somebody that can also recognize it in you if they see it before you do, and they can, tap your shoulder and say, hey, hang on a second, let's talk about this, and that sort of thing. But, yeah, very good information.
Yeah, that's where that support network and telling the two people too can also be very helpful, because you've told them, right. They feel like then they can approach you and they kind of see some signs, because you lose that self-awareness very, very quickly and you don't even know that it happened. We got some really great feedback. I really liked as we were putting together the information. I was really, really overwhelmed with the feedback that we got. A lot of people approached me and shared some really very touching stories, stories that I'm still kind of, just worried about them and hoping that they're okay. I want them so much to succeed. And I know that they really hit a roadblock, and I'm hoping they'll be able to navigate around that. So I'm glad we could put this together. But if you're asking yourself, if you're watching this webinar and you're kind of saying to yourself, I don't know if I need the self-care step, it really comes down to one question. Do you need self-care? Or can you practice self-care? If your answer to that question is anything that sounds like, I don't have the time, you need immediately to practice self-care. If you don't have time for self-care, by definition, then you definitely need to start practicing self-care. You need to really step up that game and really value yourself as an entrepreneur. Value everything you've done. Enjoy where you are on the way to where you're going. But you're not going to be able to do that if you're treading water and trying to stay above water and catch your breath and stay ahead of it. So taking care of yourself, it's a love letter to myself as much as it is to everybody else.
Yep, life comes at you pretty quick, so take the time. You only have one, so take the time to enjoy it as well. So, thanks, Kim. That was great. A lot of good information there.
Thanks for hanging out with me. I appreciate it.
My pleasure.